So I realise that this is supposed to be a Star Wars only channel, and I do hope you'll forgive me for going slightly off topic here. I did genuinely have another video planned for this week that I've had to push back because something has come into my path that has just completely left me boggled with how bad this is. It is a movie that has really cropped up in the last week or so. It only got a trailer 2 weeks ago. It was released on Amazon a week ago, and it is the latest adaptation of War of the Worlds. And for those of you who know anything about War of the Worlds, it is based off a novel from over 120 years ago now, and it's had so many different adaptations. It's had a radio adaptation in the 30s, the first movie was made in the 1950s, and most of you will probably be aware of the film that was made in 2005 that was directed by Steven Spielberg and starred Tom Cruise. It did really well at the box office. It was one of those kind of era-defining sci-fi action movies that I personally really enjoyed. I thought it was a great kind of action movie that balanced, the kind of alien invasion with the kind of tense nature of being on the ground, and also had a little story in the background about a father and his kids who didn't really kind of get on. And so it was a really good little film. It wasn't a world beater. It wasn't going to win any Oscars or anything like that, but it was good for what it was. And Tom Cruise, for all that's being said about him, he's enjoyable to watch on screen in the right role. And so there's been a few more adaptations, most notably a TV show that came out a few years ago, which started off really strongly. I think it's mostly unknown, to be honest. I only found it by accident. It spanned 3 seasons. It was a bit of a different take on the story, and it fell off, unfortunately. But this latest film stars Ice Cube, the rapper, from, the 90s and 2000s. And it is one of those rare films that make you really go, wow, how is it that they produced something so terrible? It debuted with a 0% score on Rotten Tomatoes, and I don't know if you realise how rare and difficult that is. And I want to take just a few moments to talk about this film, and, I've titled this kind of, the film that makes The Rise of Skywalker look like a masterpiece, and it really, really does. And I don't just want to, sort of pick on The Rise of Skywalker. That's just, to me, my least favourite Star Wars film, but the dialogue makes George Lucas's dialogue in Attack of the Clones look like something from a William Shakespeare play. It really is that bad. And part of it is because of circumstance. I think part of it is just laziness, because this film was unbelievably now made during the pandemic in kind of summer of 2020, right when lockdown was, at its peak. They made this film, and it really does reflect in its style. I don't know why it's taken 4 years, 5 years for it to actually release, because you wouldn't believe that there is that much post-production work to be done. If you've actually seen this film, you'll know what I mean. But the baffling thing about this film is that it takes what is a really good premise, alien invasion, people, just normal people trying to survive, and just makes it so mind-numbingly boring that you just can't fathom how something like this is made and released, and people can look at that and go, yeah, I'm happy with that. Now, just to give a bit of perspective, the film is presented to you entirely, so the entire 1 hour and 30 minutes, from the perspective of a computer screen, like you are watching someone on a webcam or through a phone or through a Zoom meeting. There is no live action camera shots. It is all done within, a browser, different windows, and it's trying to, I guess, place you into the shoes of the main character, who again is played by Ice Cube, and trying to give that perspective of a modern take on how we might view a world's disaster. An alien invasion, most of us might look at it through the lens of a computer screen or a mobile phone. And so, you could sit there and go, okay, well, that's kind of different, and you always want to give credit for trying to be experimental, but this was not the film to do that, because if you're going to have an alien invasion action film, you need to have it from the first person perspective. You need to have it on the ground, and all of the shots of the aliens, all of the shots of the action are taken either from news pieces or from, again, people's mobile phones, which typically are, distorted because of interference. You can't quite see things properly. And again, you can do that in a really good way if you, kind of implement it into the structure of the film alongside, other bits of action. I think that isn't the main problem. I mean, obviously, it really stifles the film because you never really get the feeling of urgency. The pacing is all off because of it, because, again, you're not switching between scenes. It is literally just the entire film, more or less, is focused on the face of Ice Cube as he's clicking through different, browsers and articles and videos and Zoom calls and WhatsApp calls, and it just does not work. But that's not the reason why I think this is one of the worst films I've ever seen. It's a combination of everything. The acting, and not just from Ice Cube, the likes of Eva Longoria, it just feels like they're checked out, and it really is terrible. But, I mean, Ice Cube is the main, culprit here, because he is the one who's got the most time on screen. And I'm telling you that this film could be summarized in about 2 minutes just from reaction shots of his character. It is absolutely unreal how he will sit there in front of a webcam and just make the most kind of random faces and reactions and noises. It just does not play off well, and it comes across as someone, it feels forced.
You are officially banned. Bam!
That was easy.
Oh shit. Ooh.
Or meteors.
Touchdown. Touchdown. Touchdown.
And when you consider the rest of the film, whenever there is dialogue through a news article, it feels AI generated. There's a clip, I'll show you it in just a second, where they're talking about the main premise of what the aliens are after. Which again is another really cringy and horrible thing. But I just want you to listen to this news, this snippet of the news segment, and just tell me that it doesn't sound like it's not only written by AI, but is also performed by AI. Take a listen.
With traffic escaping cities in gridlock, there's no way to get away from the invasion. Power grids are collapsing in mass numbers. The world is going dark as we speak. Financial data has been completely drained and erased, making the Earth's population totally bankrupt.
See, it does, doesn't it? It's ridiculous. And that's kind of one of the issues, is that I said, and some of you might be aware of the filmmaker Neil Breen. He is notorious, he's infamous really, for making terrible, but entertaining B-movies. He's one of these people who really buys into his own vision. He doesn't have any self-awareness about the fact that people watch his films because they do find them hilariously bad. And that can be great, because that is a genuine genre of film, is the bad B-movies. And I really enjoy a good bad B-movie, but this is not trying to be that. It's trying to be a serious film. It's a serious production released on Amazon and, starring some pretty big people. Unfortunately, Clark Gregg is also in this. I say unfortunately because I really like him as an actor. Loved him in, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And other stuff that he's done. And unfortunately, he's kind of tied up in this in a fairly minor role, but still a role nonetheless. But going back to my point, I always felt like this film, having watched it, it felt like Neil Breen had entered in a script into like ChatGPT. And this film was the result of that. Someone who writes like an AI, who inputs his vision and his script into AI, it then produces something that feels like it's written by AI. And that is kind of like, it just takes you out of it so much. It is hilarious at points, just how bad the dialogue is, the acting. And again, I want to get to the central premise of what the aliens are actually after, because this film wastes no time. It's literally like 10 minutes into the film, the invasion begins. There's no slow build-up like in the 2005 War of the Worlds, where it gives you like 10-15 minutes of this atmospheric build-up. There's the storm, there's the kind of people crowding around the lightning strike points, and then there's the slow reveal of the tripods. And it builds and builds and builds. It's done in a really cool way, but in this, it's just like, boom, things start hitting with really bad CGI, might I mention. The CGI in this film is atrocious. And again, considering the fact that they've had 4 or 5 years in post-production, you think that they may, have decided on something a little bit better than what they ended up with. Because I don't know the budget for this film. I presume it wasn't, terribly high, just given the fact that it was, an Amazon Prime production, never intended for theatrical release. But even still, you consider the fact that their location shots are probably just small rooms with green screens. They can't really have cost too much to make in the first place. So there should have been more than enough left over for, the CGI budget. Apparently not, though, because some of the shots are atrocious. But the alien invasion takes place very early on. The stakes are they attempt to raise the stakes because Ice Cube's daughter gets injured, she's pregnant, and they try and play it off again as this story of a father who's put his work ahead of his kids. He's kind of out of touch with them. There's clearly problems there, and they try to make it this redeemed parent story right the way through in hilarious fashion at one point, as whilst the world is burning down around him, whilst there's people screaming on Zoom calls at him, all of a sudden Ice Cube just decides to start penning an email to his daughter. And it is kind of the most out of place thing. And that's really what I can say, is that a lot of things in this film just feel out of place. There's a national disaster going on. You've got the head of the Homeland Security Department phoning you, but then your girlfriend's boyfriend, your daughter's boyfriend starts to phone you, and so you just go and speak to him instead. Who, by the way, is clad full on in Amazon gear. There's shameless Amazon promotion here, because the daughter's boyfriend works for Amazon. He's a delivery driver. They even try and make him the hero with this kind of strange Amazon delivery drone set piece where he's got to try and get a memory stick to Ice Cube into this secure building. Again, logic doesn't really apply to this film. There's a massive secret government building where Ice Cube works that's supposedly secure. He can't get out of because they're in lockdown, but the drone can get in, and there's no one else in the building. Absolutely no one else. That's why, again, the film just feels out of place in so many ways. But the premise for the aliens, I'll get to the point here eventually, I'm rambling a little bit, but the premise of the aliens coming to Earth is that they want data. They want data. And again, in other War of the Worlds adaptions, it's they harvest humans. They're after the resources of the Earth, the kind of typical things that aliens might be after for one reason or another. But no, in this, it's because they want data. And so they're attacking all of the data centers across the world to try and eat data. It sounds ridiculous, and there is a horrible line from, once again, our AI news reporter here, who says that data is our most most precious resource.
We are in utter chaos without our most precious resource, our data.
Not water, not food, not love and kindness, not even sports. It is data. And so they're draining all the data. And as this happens, the world's kind of digital systems start to go on the fritz, planes start to crash, GPS systems go offline. Ironically, the internet is fine. This whole film, which is done through the internet, is still fine, despite all of the data being wiped. Again, no logic there whatsoever. And, and the most infuriating thing as well, within the space of a minute, the two main characters who are talking about, make the discovery, which is Eva Longoria and Ice Cube, they go from saying data, which is, again, I know the American, I don't even know if it's a European way. I always say data, just because I grew up on Star Trek The Next Generation. That's how it was pronounced. But they go from the two different enunciations of the word in the space of a minute. They go from saying data or data to data. And there's no reason for it. They say data centers, and then they want our data. And I'm like, come on, one or the other. I get it that people say things differently, but you're going between the two in the space of a minute. Where's the direction here? Was there a director? But that is the reason why the aliens, want to invade. And so they come up with, again, another kind of over the top. And this is the thing that I liked about the 2005 War of the Worlds, is that all the characters were just normal people. It was just Tom Cruise, who was just a struggling working class guy who had 2 kids, who, was trying to spend the weekend with them. The 2 kids were relatively, normal kids, but in this adaptation, we've obviously got a guy who is like the star of the Department of Homeland Security. He's, throughout the entire film, displaying how much he can observe people. He's tracking down this hacker known as the Disruptor. His daughter is this kind of super genius DNA biologist who invents the cure to the alien invasion. She makes this DNA altering virus thing. And his son, as it turns out, and I saw this coming from the moment that, I realized that, the hacker's not, they try and find him, they can't find him. And then the son phones up saying, I know more than you think. And I'm like, right, the son's the hacker. The son's like this hacker that the Department of Homeland Security has been after for so long. And he is the hacker. So again, super genius daughter, super genius hacker son, and the dad is, this kind of big surveillance guru who, everyone comes to. And he's on calls with the president, he's on calls with the Secretary of Defense, and it's just kind of like, there's no structure to it. You would imagine in an emergency, like a worldwide international emergency, there would be official kind of people in groups together in buildings, in meeting rooms. But no, they're all on Zoom calls, like individually. And I get that, again, this is probably a product of the pandemic, because you can't really get people together in a room for something like this. They probably planned it to be this way, but it really doesn't play off well, because you've got the president, you've got the director of Homeland Security, you've got the main character, you've got all these other people, like these generals, and they're all in different locations, and like one of them's out in the park, and I'm like, come on now, think of it a little bit more logically. I get what you're trying to do stylistically, but think of it logically. And so you've got these 3 super genius characters who come up with the plot to, save the world. They manage to inject a virus into the data that feeds back into the aliens, and the aliens start to collapse, yada, yada, yada. But there's no tension. There's no build-up. You don't feel worried, because everything takes place in the form of a webcam or a phone camera. Very limited phone camera coverage, by the way. I'd say 90% of this is just Ice Cube's face in a web camera in the same room. And his reactions, that's it. He's just looking down into the camera like this, pretending to type, and he's like, damn! And he's like, shit! And it's like, it is just so bad. So mind-numbingly bad. And because there's no sort of diversity in the pacing and, the kind of the story, because you don't break away to see anyone else's perspective, that's what makes it so bad and so boring, because it's the same thing all the way through the film. I endeavour you to watch the first 15 minutes, and then you don't need to watch the rest, because you've seen it all. You've seen the perspective of the film all the way through. And you know what? I can see what they're trying to do here. This is not so much a War of the Worlds film. They're not trying to tell a story about an alien invasion. They're trying to tell some kind of a convoluted story about how the government can surveil you so easily, and how, that is going to have consequences. And it's a warning about Big Brother. And, it's done in such an unsubtle manner. It really is, because this main character, Ice Cube, can do anything. He can apprehend drones. He can, find people's locations. He can do voice matching for, distorted voices. He can spy on pretty much any camera in the world, whether it's inside of an aircraft, whether it's, in an Amazon van, whether it's in an office. He's got access to all the cameras all across the world. And again, that's what kind of makes it so boring. It's just that all he's doing is typing in this, you see the camera view. This, you see the camera view. And it's not him. There's not even much in the way of exposition. It's just kind of like news reports, which are, again, completely insane, because something will happen. Like, you'll be watching Ice Cube, see something happen in real time, like the alien invasion happens, and then 2 seconds later there's a fully prepped news report about it with top secret information. Like, when there are bombers that are sent to Washington DC to try and destroy the data center that's being invaded by the aliens, and that's where they try and put the tension. That's the stakes at the end of the film, is that if they can't put this virus into the system, then DC is going to get blown up by their own bombers and kill everyone there. But it really doesn't work. But literally the second the bombers are taking off, there's like a news report saying, oh, bombers have been dispatched to Washington, D.C., and here's the entire military plan for this. And it's like, you wouldn't have that information. Certainly not that quickly after the bombers took off. And it's just so unbelievable. And that's the reason why the mixture of terrible dialogue with the terrible structure in terms of how the movie is presented through this one screen, and the boring story, the boring pace, the lack of any stakes, the lack of any tension, just really builds into a 0% film. And that's why this genuinely might be the worst film I've ever seen. And I have seen Longmageddon. I have seen a lot of B movies, but at least, they're kind of relative to, their stature. You can appreciate a low-budget independent film being bad because that's really all it ever should be. It's very rare you will get an independent film with a low budget with amateur actors that really becomes a hit, and that's part of the beauty of it. Whereas this has, I'm not going to say that Ice Cube is an established actor, but there are established actors in this. There is presumably a decent budget behind it because, again, I imagine the editing process was a nightmare because it's constantly just switching between digital screens. So the editing for this, rather than having like long shots with characters interacting and talking, and you've only got to worry about the positioning of the cameras and how you want a shot to be viewed. This is all kind of like zooming into digital screens, going from one to the other. So it would have been a lot of post-production work, which didn't pay off. Unfortunately. But that's why I say, we can all sit there and we can moan about Star Wars, we can moan about movies that we don't like, but there are things out there which are truly, truly awful. People who say the sequels are the worst thing in the world, I implore you to watch this film and tell me that this is better than any of those sequel films. They are all Oscar worthy compared to War of the Worlds 2025 with Ice Cube. And again, I'm not surprised why this got such a short lead up in terms of the trailer being out 2 weeks ago, the film being released a week ago, and then there's just been radio silence about it. And it's only really been, and you know what, the ironic thing is that probably it's got really high viewing numbers because people have heard about how bad it is and they want to see it for themselves. And that's the truth here. And that's what I found. So, that's kind of what I wanted to really talk about here. And again, I apologise for this not being a Star Wars related video directly, but we will get back on track with a video that I've got planned, which hopefully will be out in the next week. But yeah, if you've seen it, let me know. If not, let me know what other movies you've sat there and you've watched and you've gone, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, because I would genuinely like to know. Partially because I'm interested in maybe watching it, because I do enjoy a good bad movie, but this is not a good bad movie. It's a bad movie that you have to watch at least once to just believe how bad it is. But that's it. That's what I wanted to say. So thank you for watching. If you're still stuck with me, I'll see you for the next one.